When Caitlin Clark was out, the WNBA's popularity dissipated. That is a fact.
A storm is gathering around the world of basketball, and at the center of it stands the woman many believed would rescue the league, Caitlin Clark. Just when it seemed the controversies surrounding the Indiana Fever star couldn't escalate further, a bombshell has dropped, and it comes straight from one of sports media's loudest voices, Stephen A. Smith. He didn't hint. He didn't dance around it. He delivered a brutal assessment that appears to confirm what fans refuse to believe could actually be happening. Is the Caitlin Clark era in Indiana collapsing before it ever truly got off the ground? The whispers have become deafening, and the evidence is growing impossible to dismiss. What's being uncovered goes well beyond basketball. This is a story about pressure, resentment, on a system that may be destroying its most valuable player from the inside out. What's unfolding behind the scenes is more disturbing than most people realize, and it suggests that the sport's biggest name is being pushed toward an exit that would send shockwaves through the entire sports world. This is no longer just rumor. It's a conclusion built on a mountain of evidence, a pattern of behavior so destructive it points toward one outcome. Stephen A. Smith laid out the case, and now the sports world is holding its breath, bracing for an announcement that feels nearly inevitable, a confirmation of the league's greatest failure. To grasp the scale of what's at stake, you first need to understand what Caitlin Clark actually means to this league. She isn't simply another player. She's a phenomenon, a one-woman economic engine for a league that has spent decades fighting for mainstream relevance. Stephen A. Smith said it plainly. She is the cash cow, the box office, the golden goose laying golden eggs for everyone around her. And he wasn't exaggerating. The numbers are staggering. When she plays, arenas sell out, and viewership records that had stood for decades get shattered. We're talking about a 156% increase in sellout games for the Fever, with viewership nearly tripling from the prior season. Her debut was the most-watched WNBA game in over 20 years, drawing an average of 2.1 million viewers, a number that outpaced many NHL and MLB broadcasts. Teams like the Las Vegas Aces and Atlanta Dream saw their single-game attendance records broken the instant Indiana came to town. Secondary market ticket prices for her games soared into the hundreds, sometimes thousands of dollars, figures previously unimaginable in the WNBA. This wasn't just growth, it was a revolution, and it's been almost entirely driven by what the media calls the Caitlin Clark effect. When injury forced her off the court, the consequences were immediate and severe. Ratings for nationally televised games collapsed by 55%. The league's viewership was essentially cut in half without her. It was a frightening preview of a reality the WNBA could be forced back into. As Stephen A. Smith noted, her absence became the ultimate proof of her worth. She is the gravitational pull, drawing eyes, money, and relevance to women's basketball. Everything she touches turns to gold, and her presence alone is reshaping the financial future of the entire league. No, but that immense value came at a cost, and it placed a target on her back from the moment she stepped onto a professional court. A target that, disturbingly, seemed tolerated by the very league she was enriching. From her very first game, it was obvious that Clark's welcome to the WNBA would be anything but warm. She was hammered, shoved, and hip-checked in ways that went far beyond normal physical play. The aggression was relentless and bordered on dangerous, a clear, repeated message being sent by the league's veterans. This wasn't tough defense. It was a systematic campaign of intimidation. High-profile moments, like the blindside shove from Chennedy Carter, initially ruled a common foul, exploded across social media and ignited fierce debate. The fact that Carter had called Clark a slur before the hit made it feel deeply personal. But then came the ongoing harassment from players like Dejounte Carrington, whose excessive taunting and physical aggression seemed aimed at provocation. Angel Reese's flagrant foul, a hard shot to Clark's head, was yet another moment that left fans furious. Clark herself voiced her frustration publicly, telling reporters she felt like she was constantly getting hammered, and that opponents got away with things against her that they simply wouldn't against anyone else. Her coach, Christy Sides, confirmed that the team was regularly submitting footage of uncalled fouls to the league office, a desperate plea for protection that appeared to go nowhere. It was a silent war on the court, seemingly designed to break her down. The player bringing in all the new fans and revenue was being used as a punching bag, While officials often looked the other way, a troubling double standard that left her exposed while other stars were shielded. This pattern of aggression raised a deeply uncomfortable question. Was the league that needed her so desperately also unwilling to protect her? But what played out on camera was only part of the story. The accounts emerging from locker rooms and private conversations were even more unsettling. The on-court aggression was merely a symptom of something far more corrosive, a controversy that Stephen A. Smith was one of the few with a platform large enough to confront directly. He exposed the unspoken resentment quietly festering within the league, a toxic blend of professional jealousy and racial tension. In his characteristic explosive style, he explained that Clark, a white player, had arrived in the WNBA with an unprecedented wave of attention, sponsorships, and headlines, and that it didn't sit well with many of the league's established stars, the majority of whom are black. These were veterans who had poured years into the league without receiving a fraction of that spotlight, and their frustration was understandable. It wasn't necessarily a personal hatred of Clark, it was the deep resentment of watching a white player walk in and immediately be handed the keys to a house they had spent their careers building. Smith was direct. Players watched this young white woman take the league by storm, and they resented it. This wasn't speculation, it was a narrative that explained the hyper-aggressive play, the cold receptions, and the visible satisfaction some opponents took in knocking her down. Now, Clark herself addressed it with striking honesty, acknowledging that as a white player in a league built by black athletes, there is an element of privilege she carries. That pressure cooker environment, fueled by jealousy, racial undertones, and cultural friction, turned her rookie season into a fight for survival both on and off the court. She wasn't just battling opponents, she was battling the very culture of the league she was supposed to be leading into a new era, and that grinding, relentless battle began to take a serious physical toll. The human body can only absorb so much punishment, and the constant battering Clark endured began to wear her down. Her career has been marked by a string of frustrating and significant injuries, the kind that erode a player's explosiveness and slowly steal their joy for the game. She was sidelined with a quad strain that forced her to miss games for the first time since high school, a telling sign of the strain she was operating under. But worse was still to come. In her second season, she was shut down entirely in September due to recurring soft tissue injuries in her groin, the kind of nagging, compounding damage that results from constant physical trauma and overuse. The season was over before its time. Her coach, Stephanie White, acknowledged that they simply ran out of time to get her healthy in a way that was safe, emphasizing that Clark's long-term well-being came first. But reading between the lines, the message was plain. The accumulation of hits, the unrelenting physical punishment, and the war of attrition had finally broken through. In her exit interview, Clark spoke candidly about the recovery process, revealing that being injured actually demands more work than playing. Endless hours alone in the training room, grinding through painful rehab, battling the mental weight of watching from the sidelines while her body refused to cooperate. These injuries weren't a streak of bad luck. They were the predictable consequence of a player being systematically and relentlessly targeted. And while her body was breaking down, the team built around her was showing its own fractures, adding yet another layer of uncertainty to an already dire situation. While external pressures mounted, the foundation of the Indiana Fever itself began to crack. Building a championship roster around a generational talent is a delicate balancing act. May and the financial realities of the league were about to make it significantly harder. The WNBA's new collective bargaining agreement, a landmark deal, was set to dramatically raise player salaries, but it also introduced a hard salary cap that made retaining multiple stars on one team extraordinarily difficult. Suddenly, Indiana was staring down a serious math problem. Key players like Aaliyah Boston became eligible for a massive max contract far sooner than expected. Star guard Kelsey Mitchell was also due for a supermax deal worth over $250,000 per year. With Clark's own salary set to jump from under six figures to over $500,000 in 2026, the Fever were hurtling toward a salary cap crisis. Clark, Boston, and Mitchell alone could consume nearly half the team's entire cap space, leaving almost nothing to build a championship-caliber roster around them. On top of that, departure rumors began circulating. Veteran guard Erica Wheeler, someone Clark had publicly praised as a key teammate and mentor, hinted at leaving in free agency. These weren't minor adjustments. They were signals that the team's core could be pulled apart by financial pressures before it ever fully came together. The vision of building a dynasty around Clark was colliding head-on with salary cap realities and player ambitions. It meant Clark could find herself anchored to a team that couldn't afford to give her what she needed to win. The pressure was arriving from every direction at once: opposing teams, internal league culture, her own deteriorating body, and now the structural limitations of her team's financial future. It was this perfect storm of impossible circumstances that led Stephen A. Smith to make his most explosive declaration yet, the moment where all the pieces lock into place. This is where analysis became something closer to confirmation of the unthinkable. Smith had watched the relentless physical assault on Clark. He had called out the league's internal resentment and racial undertones. He had seen the devastating ratings fallout her injuries caused, and he connected every dot in a way no one else would. When he went on his now infamous first-take monologues, he wasn't merely defending a player. He was issuing a grave warning and a scorching indictment of the entire WNBA. And he argued passionately that the league and its players needed to wake up and recognize that Clark was the golden goose lifting everyone up financially, and that their jealousy was going to kill her and the golden eggs along with her. His outrage over her being left off the Olympic roster wasn't about a single snub. He called the decision outright idiocy, framing it as yet another example of an institution failing to protect and capitalize on its most important asset. He declared that if ratings cratered the moment she went down with an injury, then everyone needed to step back and accept her irreplaceable value. This is the confirmation. Stephen A. Smith confirmed that the environment surrounding Caitlin Clark has become untenable. He confirmed that the combination of on-court violence, off-court jealousy, financial instability, and the league's failure to fully embrace its biggest star had created conditions no player, no matter how talented or resilient, could be reasonably expected to endure indefinitely. He wasn't claiming to have a source saying she'd filed retirement papers. He was doing something more powerful, laying out undeniable evidence and presenting a clear, logical case that the WNBA itself was engineering the very conditions that would force her out, leaving a league utterly dependent on her to face the fallout from its own self-destruction. What we're left with is a chilling reality. The supposed savior of the WNBA, the player who has generated more attention and revenue for the sport than anyone in its history, finds herself in an impossible position. She is the league's greatest asset, yet she has been treated like its biggest threat. She has been physically beaten down, mentally exhausted by controversy, and now faces a future where the team around her may be dismantled by financial constraints before it ever reaches its potential. Stephen A. Smith didn't just confirm a rumor. He confirmed that the pressures bearing down on Caitlin Clark are unsustainable. He exposed the brutal truth that the system is failing its own superstar, that the league is actively consuming the very person it needs most to survive. The real question is no longer whether she can withstand the pressure, but why she should have to. If the WNBA allows its golden goose to be driven out, by force or by choice, what becomes of the golden eggs? What happens to the record-breaking television deals, the sold-out arenas, the flood of new fans who showed up because of her? And the entire future of the league hangs in the balance, teetering on the edge of a decision that could either propel it into a new era or send it spiraling back into irrelevance. The fans don't want to believe it, but the signs are all there, impossible to ignore. The only question left is, what happens when the league's biggest star is finally pushed past the point of no return?